In an online environment, there is definitely a way that digital technology can support universal design for learning. On the other hand, we do want to be careful that oftentimes in online environments, it's very easy to pack a lot of things in. We want to be careful that we're not overwhelming students, but that we're making sure that we're providing them with the content that's necessary in order to reach the learning objectives for the course, and also then assessing them along the way.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language,
Christopher Hromalik follows up his talk, Inclusive by Design, with a conversation about universal design and what it means for the language classroom.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. Today, we welcome Christopher Hromalik to our podcast. Dr. Hromalik is professor of Spanish and coordinator of Spanish and French at Onondaga Community College in Syracuse.
He gave a talk as part of our monthly LRC speaker series on universal design for learning, and we will extend our conversation about the implications for language educators. Welcome to Speaking of Language, Chris.
Thank you, Angelica. Thank you, Sam. It's very nice to be here today.
Before we talk more about the very informational and inspiring talk you just gave, can you talk a little bit about your background, the research that you do, and your path with languages?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm professor of Spanish at Onondaga Community College in Syracuse, New York. I'm a coordinator of Spanish and French there as well. I'm also the chair of the Actful Distance Learning Special Interest Group. I recently completed the PhD in Instructional Design, Development and Evaluation at Syracuse University. In May 2020, graduated. For my dissertation, I proposed a model of the self-regulated language learning process. And so I'm very interested in how self-regulated learning can affect the acquisition of a second language. I'm also, one of my second interests is in faculty professional development. And so, as we talked about today in the talk, that I've been taking part in faculty professional development for universal design for learning for community college faculty.
You gave a talk called Inclusive by Design about universal design for learning in the world language classroom here at the LRC, or over Zoom, as we do now. So maybe we could start talking about that by hearing a quick summary of your talk for our listeners.
Sure. So for the talk, I started by introducing the universal design for learning framework and explaining how universal design and universal design for learning are meant to help us to design for all learners from the start and to be proactive in our design as opposed to reactive, and to design from the start instead of trying to retrofit. I provided recommendations that could be used to help make our digital instructional materials more accessible to all learners. And also, I provided some strategies for universal designing for learning that could be implemented quickly in the language classroom. As part of the talk, I ended by telling about some of the work that I've done to help study the effects of the Universal Design for Learning Academy, which was a multi-day training that was funded by the Onondaga Pathways to Careers project through a grant from the Office of Disability Employment Policy from the Department of Labor, and in which I was a part of that from 2016 through 2019.
Chris, in your talk, you outlined 3 principles of UDL, multiple means of engagement, of representation, and of action and expression. And you also started, you just mentioned this, with some of the small steps that educators can use even as early as tomorrow. Could you synthesize some of those small steps? What is something concrete that language educators can do that doesn't take completely revamping their entire curriculum and all of their materials?
That's an excellent question. I would say, one thing from each of, I found that there were 4 sort of categories that I had used. I looked at accessibility, multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action expression. And so just one quick thing from each of those, I'd say that in terms of accessibility, language instructors can set the language of text in a document and mark changes in the language in a document in Word or PowerPoint. So that's something that's quick and easy and can be done with any new resource that we design and develop. For multiple means of engagement, I'd recommend having your students reflect on their progress in the course. They can create reflective journals, for example. At the start of the semester, they can state some of the goals that they have for the course. In a later journal, they can break them down to short-term objectives, for example. From there, what I do with my own students, at least, is I give them prompts throughout the semester based on the 6 dimensions of academic self-regulation from Zimmerman. So it works well for me because it's easy to remember. So it's the with whom, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the how of learning. With whom refers to seeking help from peers or from your instructor, and working collaboratively with your peers. The what is self-monitoring, and to self-assess and to see what progress you've made, and then reflect back on what you can do in order to improve. The where is the physical environment in which you study and the instructional materials you use. The when, time management. The why, motivation. And then the how of learning are the learning strategies you use. So I prompt students throughout a semester to think about with whom they study, how they ask for help, and that sort of thing, so that they can continue to think about their own learning and reflect on their progress. For multiple means of representation, they can upload resources to the learning management system ahead of time, such as PowerPoints or Word documents. And multiple means of action expression, they can provide a model or an example of the type of work that students can do for an assignment.
So you just talked about the where and the environment. And one question that actually came up during your talk was if teaching online makes applying UDL easier or maybe even more complicated. Can you address that question again?
So what I would say is that that's an excellent question. So is it easier to use UDL in an online classroom? I'm not sure that it's easier so much as there are certain ways that the digital technology of the online classroom can be helpful in using UDL. For example, you may find that you're able to provide more options in terms of how instruction is presented to learners, and that could be something that might be aided in the online environment. You might be able to, within the online environment, create, students can take learning paths along the way in a learning environment. So they could, if you have content represented in more than one media, they could read, but they could also then follow a video as well. In an online environment, there is definitely a way that digital technology can support universal design for learning. On the other hand, we do want to be careful that oftentimes in an online environment, it's very easy to pack a lot of things in. So many assignments. We want to be careful that we're not overwhelming students, but that we're making sure that we're providing them with the content that's necessary in order to reach the learning objectives for the course, and also then assessing them along the way to see if they've reached the learning outcomes.
So following up on that, what's the difference in applying UDL principles between synchronous and asynchronous online language instruction?
One thing that comes to mind is I think about one of the suggestions that I had given as part of the talk was collaborative activities for students to take part in when they're working either in the face-to-face classroom or in the synchronous online classroom. The idea of having group roles when you're working with students in a synchronous online classroom is something that can be very helpful for students who may feel anxious speaking aloud on camera in front of a whole class of students in the gallery view on Zoom. What you may find is that when you work in the asynchronous online language classroom, you may find that there are other sorts of activities in which learners are taking part where you want to keep in mind similar ideas. For example, in discussion forums, are there going to be ways that you can offer different ways that students can complete assignments in a discussion forum? And so I would say that there are going to be potentially some differences in the mode of delivery, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, but you'll still want to keep in mind the idea that there could be different ways that you can pique learners' interest. There are going to be different ways that learners can complete assignments, whether that's synchronously or asynchronously. And so providing options for them to be able to still reach the construct of interest. And when it comes to representing information, multiple means of representation, whether that's in the synchronous or asynchronous class, you'll still want to consider how you could provide options for students to receive the content that you're providing to them.
Well, and I think that then also applies not only to the modality of synchronous and asynchronous, but also thinking about face-to-face classes versus online classes, whatever format the online class will take.
Yeah, so I think I'd talked a little bit earlier during the talk about the debate about whether UDL requires technology or not. So this idea of I've read pieces that say both ways, that UDL doesn't require technology, and then another that'll say, well, yes, you can't universally design without digital technology. I look at it as UDL benefits from the use of technology, and it can truly just come to fruition when technology is used to support learning. So that being said, when we think about a face-to-face environment, we might consider it to be more of a low-tech environment, for example, such as what you might see in like a traditional college classroom where there might be limited digital technology. UDL applies to both. So you can, the strategy that I'd given a little bit earlier about choosing group roles, that can happen in a face-to-face classroom. It can happen online in a synchronous online classroom. It can happen when you have students work together asynchronously in working to lead a discussion, for example. And providing resources ahead of time works well both face-to-face and online as well, too. So if you're providing PowerPoints or Word documents ahead of time, whether you're face-to-face, whether you're online, it works the same way. Accessibility. Accessibility is crucial, whether students are studying face-to-face, whether they're studying online. Same thing with reflection as well, too, thinking about reflecting on learning. It's important and can be done in the classroom. It can be done outside the classroom. It can be done with or without digital technology, and providing options as well for how students reflect with or without digital technology can also be helpful in helping all students to be able to take part in the learning environment, the learning experience.
Can you talk a bit more about the UDL Academy and your work with UDL training for faculty, staff, and administrators?
Sure. So let me think where to begin, how to say this the most concise way here. So from 2016 to 2019, I was fortunate enough to work with a group of colleagues from the Onondaga Pathways to Careers project, which was funded through a grant from the Office of Disability Employment Policy from the U.S. Department of Labor. And they funded the UDL Academy, which was a multi-day intense training in universal design for learning. And I was recruited to be a part of that when I was still working on my PhD. And I was able to I eventually became the faculty coordinator and lead instructional designer. We walked our participants, which were faculty, staff, and administrators, through a instructional design model that we had created to help them to be able to universally design their instruction. And we asked them to think of a problem or a barrier that they might have had in their classroom. Think about a lesson that may not always go as well as they'd like. Or think about something that maybe they're just bored with at this point, that they find boring, is not interesting anymore, or they find students always have questions about. And to start there and to think, how can I redesign this unit of instruction through the lens of the UDL framework? And so we guide them through training in disability awareness and etiquette, the Americans with Disabilities Act, through accommodations and understanding the student population at Onondaga Community College. But then we also train them, of course, in universal design for learning. And from there, we walk them through the process of analyzing the courses that they were teaching and to analyze that unit of instruction that they found needed some redesign work. We walk them through how to design a UDL-based instructional intervention. And then we set them off throughout the summer to develop their instructional intervention. They implement in the fall, and then we help them to evaluate it.
Nice. What were some of the biggest takeaways that you've seen from some of the participants? Where were the aha light bulb moments for some of the participants? Were there any recurring themes or things that stood out to you?
So one of the first things I think that there were a few things that came out of the academy. First thing that I think of is we gave them time to workshop ideas with each other. And so this was something that in many cases, some of them had worked with their colleagues to try to help make improvements for their students. But it was now this opportunity to really share ideas with each other that they found, this is great. We're working now across departments. We're working even across disciplines within our own departments for the first time in larger departments.
Nice.
And I think that was something that really hit home for many of them. I think that when I noticed that when we had two forums as well that I haven't mentioned. One of them was a student forum where we invited 4 students with disabilities who came to speak about their experience at Onondaga Community College. And as you can imagine, students are quite honest. They will say what their experience has been, and it was very eye-opening for everyone that was there to understand some of the highs and some of the lows, some of the things that had gone really well, and some of the challenges as well too. And I think that was very helpful as we worked with faculty and as the faculty themselves started to think about how can I make design changes to my own courses, keeping in mind these 4 students that I just met. If they were in my class, how am I going to address some of the barriers that they may have faced in other courses that they've taken? In addition, after the first year, we had a UDL Academy alumni forum as well too. And so we brought back some of the instructors who had gone through the academy from previous years as well too. And they would talk about their experience going through the academy and choosing their instructional intervention that they wanted to create. So thinking about the unit of instruction that needed to be worked on. And that was something that is tough. Oftentimes we're thinking about, so what are the problems that we have? What are some of the barriers that students face? It's hard to turn that mirror on yourself and think about what are some things that I need to do? And so that's also helpful. And for a lot of faculty, when they finally realize, oh my goodness, this is what I want to work on. That's that aha moment you talk about.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues who she created an amazing video that you can actually find on YouTube if you were to search for her information on there. She has a YouTube video that she created to help her American Sign Language students to learn about the places on campus. So she actually took them for a campus tour, and it was signed, and then she captioned it. She put closed captions in English so that it could be followed by anybody who wanted to view it. And this is the sort of thing that this aha moment when she figured this out, and then was able to share it with her students. And then when we go on to lockdown, she's still able to take them for this tour of campus, even when we're away from the campus now. So we truly see now that this is something that was created in response to a student who was unable to actually take the physical campus tour because of limited mobility. But then as a result, now this is something that all students were able to use to study. This is something that now is being used in COVID-19. It's used when there's snow days. So it becomes, here's a primary benefit and here's a secondary. So it was that aha moment for her as well too.
Nice. And one thing you mentioned is the perspective of the students. And this actually reminds me of our last podcast episode where we talked about professional development for language educators and how so many times we forget to ask the students about what they think, right? And what problems they face and what solutions they have. So I appreciate that you guys integrated the student perspective and simply asked, what are some of the issues that you guys face? Yep. That's wonderful.
What additional resources are out there for teachers?
So on the PowerPoint that I shared today, I do provide many additional resources at the end. So there are additional resources there for accessibility, for universal design for learning, for captioning, and also some other additional resources that anybody who's interested could consult. But in terms of things I'd recommend, if you're in higher education, I definitely recommend looking at UDL on Campus. This is a site that CAST put out, and they provide examples case studies and other examples from higher education. And so I'd recommend this as a site that anybody interested in universal design for learning can go and see what are some ways that this is being done on other campuses. Unfortunately, I have not seen examples there from languages, but the nice thing about that, though, is that some of the solutions that they came up with to overcome some of the barriers in learning that students were experiencing could be applicable to the language classroom as well, too. For K-12 educators, they could also look at the UDL guidelines page, or also for higher education as well, too, where they can learn more about the UDL principles and guidelines. You can download materials, graphic organizers. And in addition, there is a free ebook as well, UDL, Universal Design for Learning Theory and Practice. And it's available as a free ebook, and I provide a link to that as well, too. And I'd suggest going and looking at that, because what's nice about the free ebook as opposed to the paper text, which there is a paper text available, but the free ebook version contains videos and other supplementary materials that help to take the information that's in that book, and you can go further with that as well, too. Case studies, examples of how to apply it in a K-12 learning environment, that sort of thing as well, too. So excellent resource.
So what would your piece of advice be for somebody who is completely new to thinking about UDL? What's the one place where they start? Something that doesn't seem overwhelming, something that is easy to or easier to implement?
Oh, wow. And the reason I'm struggling with this one is because I actually found it to be quite complex as things go. I find the Universal Design for Learning framework to be rather complex. And so it did take me quite a while to really get a grasp on everything, to really wrap my head around where do I even start? And what does a UDL classroom look like? And so I think probably, I'm trying to think what I would recommend. I mean, I think that if you're really going to start anywhere, the one place to start would be UDL Theory and Practice, the free book that I had mentioned. I think that's an excellent resource. It's a relatively quick read as well, too, and it really covers everything you need. There are examples in there as well, too, of how it's applied to a classroom. Now, again, that I'm pretty sure it's a K-12 example, so those in higher ed may want to look at another source such as UDL on campus. But I'd say that if you're going to go to one place and you have the time to read that book, I would suggest doing so. If you don't have the time to read the book, oh, wow.
Make time and read the book.
Could be, yes.
Angelica has spoken, everyone.
Yeah, there you go. I did find that it is a complex framework. It takes time. I think it takes time. And I don't know if I made this clear in the actual talk itself, but one thing I do recommend is trying to take a workshop or a training of some sort, to go through a 1 or 2 hour workshop of some sort. I'm hoping Actiful will offer something like this in the future. I'm hoping Actiful or Calico potentially too, something that could be related to
or IELTS. All the options, or all three.
There we go.
Well,
exactly.
But Chris, I appreciate your honesty here, because I do think that people need to be aware of, I think the term UDL and accessibility, they've been used so much since we went in remote insanity and then moved to some form of online teaching during COVID times. And I think people always assume that you flip a switch and all of a sudden you become an expert only by virtue of teaching online. Yeah. And it's the same with teaching online. It's a craft. I mean, people have degrees in effective online course development and online language teaching. And so I appreciate that you are bringing that up, that it's the same with UDL, it takes time and it's a constant effort. So definitely. Thank you for pointing that out.
With accessibility, I took an entire course in how to create accessible and usable digital materials. And so it is a challenging topic. What I would say, though, is it's important to start somewhere. So to start with, for example, marking changes in language when it comes to accessibility. Start with alternative text as well, too. Start with making sure that videos are captioned. Talk to an instructional designer on your campus or your Office of Accessibility Resources and find out what resources are available to have some of the videos for my courses captioned. Are there funds on campus to provide this so that I don't have to go through and do this as an instructor who it may not be something that you're not sure, you may not know how to do it yourself. Asking help is very important as well. And I'd say that starting with small strategies, such as some of the ones that I've mentioned, is a great way to go as well, too.
Great.
Yeah. Terrific. before we sign off, we'd just like to ask you to share your favorite word in a language you speak, love, or are learning. So please let us know what this word is.
So a colleague of mine had asked me at one point what word I think of when I think of something that will give me strength or help me to be calm or help me to just be better in difficult times. And she eventually had given us a rock, a little rock where she painted the word on there. And every time we look at it, we're supposed to think about that word, and it's something that will help calm us down. And so the word I put on there was family. And so that's something that I find important, and that's something that when I think of the word family, it's something that helps me to feel better. And so I'd say that'd be the word I like, family.
Wonderful. I love it. And very applicable to the time that we find ourselves in. Great. Well, Chris, thank you so much for speaking of language with us today.
Thank you, Angelica. Thank you, Sam.
Next week, we have Greg Green with us on our podcast.
Greg is curator of the John M. Eccles collection on Southeast Asia at the Cornell University Library and developed an app for learning Lao.
We will discuss everything that goes into building a language learning app and even learn what it might take for would-be programmers to create one themselves. Until then,
Auf Wiederhören!
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu or look for Cornell LRC on Facebook and Twitter.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelica Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.